Then the wound dealt by the ground-burner earlier began to scald and swell. Beowulf discovered deadly poison, suppurating inside him, surges of nausea, and so, in his wisdom, the prince realized his state and struggled towards a seat on the rampart. He steadied his gaze on those gigantic stones, saw how the earthwork was braced with arches built over columns, and now that Thane, unequal for goodness, with his own hands washed his lord's wounds, swabbed the weary prince with water, bathed him clean, unbuckled his helmet. Beowulf spoke, in spite of his wounds, mortal wounds. He still spoke, for he well knew his days in the world had been lived out to the end. His allotted time was drawing to a close. Death was very near. Now is the time when I would have wanted to bestow this armor on my own son, had it been my fortune to have fathered an heir and live in his flesh. For 50 years I ruled this nation. No king of any neighboring clan would dare face me with his troops. None had the power to intimidate me. I took what came, cared for and stood by things in my keeping, never fomented quarrels, never swore to a lie. All this consoles me, doomed as I am and sickened for my death because of my right ways. The ruler of mankind need never blame me when the breath leaves my body for murder of kinsmen. Go now, quickly, dearest Wiglaf, under the grey stone where the dragon is laid out, lost to his treasure. Hurry to feast your eyes on the hoard. Away you go. I want to examine that ancient gold, gaze my fill on those garnered jewels. My going will be easier for having seen the treasure, a less troubled letting go of the life and lordship I have long maintained. And so, I have heard, the son of Weohstan quickly obeyed the command of his languishing war-weary lord. He went to his chainmail under the rock-piled roof of the barrow, exalted in triumph, and saw beyond the seat a treasure trove of astonishing richness. Wall hangings that were a wonder to behold, glittering gold spread across the ground, the old dawn-scorched serpent's den, packed with goblets and vessels from the past, tarnished and corroding, rusty helmets all eaten away, armbands everywhere, artfully wrought. How easily treasure buried in the ground, gold hidden, however skillfully, can escape from any man. He saw, too, a standard, entirely of gold, hanging high over the hoard, a masterpiece of filigree. It glowed with light, so he could make out the ground at his feet and inspect the valuables. Of the dragon there was no remaining sign. The sword had dispatched him. Then, the story goes, a certain man plundered the hoard in that immemorial howl, filled his arms with flagons and plates, anything he wanted, and took the standard also, most brilliant of banners. Already the blade of the king's sharp killing sword had done its worst. The one who had for long minded the hoard, hovering over gold, unleashing fire, surging forth, midnight after midnight, had been mown down. Wiglaf went quickly, keen to get back, excited by the treasure. Anxiety weighed on his brave heart. He was hoping he would find the leader of the geese alive where he had left him, helpless earlier, on the open ground. So he came to the place, carrying the treasure, and found his lord bleeding profusely, his life at an end. Again he began to swab his body. The beginnings of an utterance broke out from the king's breast cage. The old lord gazed sadly at the gold. To the everlasting Lord of all, to the King of glory, I give thanks, that I behold this treasure here in front of me, that I have been allowed to leave my life so well endowed on the day I die. Now that I have bartered my last breath to own this fortune, it is up to you to look after their needs. I can hold out no longer. Order my troops to construct a barrow on the headland on the coast. After my pyre is cooled, it will loom in the horizon at Hronesness, and be a reminder among my people, so that in coming times crews under sail will call it Beowulf's Barrow, as they steer ships across the wide and shrouded waters. Then the king, in his great-heartedness, unclasped the collar of gold from his neck and gave it to the young Thane, telling him to use it, and the war-shirt, and the gilded helmet well. You are the last of us, the only one left of the Waegmundings. Fate swept us away, sent my whole brave high-born clan to their final doom. Now I must follow them. That was the warrior's last words. He had no more to confide. The furious heat of the pyre would assail him. His soul fled from his breast. to its destined place among the steadfast ones. It was hard then on the young hero, having to watch the one he held so dear there on the ground, going through his death agony. The dragon from under earth, his nightmarish destroyer, lay destroyed as well, utterly without life. No longer would his snake folds ply themselves to safeguard hidden gold. Hard-edged blades, hammered out and keenly filed, had finished him, so that the sky roamer lay there rigid, brought low beside the treasure lodge. Never again would he glitter and glide and show himself off in midnight air, exulting in his riches. He fell to earth through the battlefield's strength in Beowulf's arm. There were few, indeed, as far as I have heard, big and brave as they have been, few who would have held out if they had to face the outpourings of that poison breather, or gone foraging on the ring hall floor, and found the deep barrow dweller on guard and awake. The treasure had been won, bought and paid for by Beowulf's death. Both had reached the end of the road through the life they had been lent. The battle-dodgers abandoned the wood, the ones who had let down their lord earlier, the tail-turners, 10 of them together. When he needed them most, they had made off. Now they were ashamed and came behind shields and their battle outfits to where the old man lay. They watched Wiglaf, sitting, worn out, a comrade shoulder to shoulder with his lord, trying in vain to bring him round with water. Much as he wanted to, there was no way he could preserve his lord's life on earth, or alter in the least the Almighty's will. What God judged right would rule what happened to every man, as it does to this day. Then a stern rebuke was bound to come from the young warrior to the ones who had been cowards. Wiglaf, son of Weohstan, spoke, disdainfully and in disappointment. Anyone ready to admit the truth will surely realize that the Lord of Men who showered you with gifts and gave you the armor you are standing in, when he would distribute helmets and mail shirts to men on the mead benches, a prince treating his thanes in hall to the best he could find, far and near, was throwing weapons uselessly away. It would be a sad waste when the war broke out. Beowulf had little cause to brag about his armed guard, yet God, who ordains who wins or loses, allowed him to strike with his own blade when bravery was needed. There was little I could do to protect his life in the heat of the fray, yet I found new strength welling up when I went to help him. Then my sword connected, and the deadly assaults of our foe grew weaker. The fire coursed less strongly from his head, but when the worst happened, too few rallied around the prince. So it is goodbye now to all you know and love on your home ground, the open-handedness, the giving of war swords. Every one of you with free holds of land, our whole nation, will be dispossessed. Once princes from beyond get tidings of how you turned and fled and disgraced yourselves, a warrior will soon die than live a life of shame. Then he ordered the outcome of the fight to be reported to those camped on the ridge. That crowd of retainers who had sat all morning, sad at heart, shield-bearers wandering about, the man they loved. Would this day be his last, or would he return? He told the truth and did not balk. The rider who bore news to the cliff-top, he addressed them all. Now the people's pride and love, the Lord of Geats, is laid on his deathbed, brought down by the dragon's attack. Beside him lies the bane of his life, dead from knife wounds. There was no way Beowulf could manage to get the better of the monster with his sword. Wiglaf sits at Beowulf's side, the son of Weohstan, the living warrior watching by the dead, keeping wary vigil, holding awake for the loved and the loathed. Now war is looming over our nation. Soon it will be known to Franks and Frisians, far and wide, that the king is gone. Hostility has been great among the Franks since Hygelac sailed forth at the head of a war fleet into Friesland. There the Hetwer harried and attacked, and overwhelmed him with great odds. The leader in war gear was laid low, fell amongst followers. That lord did not favor his company with spoils. The Merovingian king has been an enemy to us ever since. Nor do I expect peace or pact-keeping of any sort from the Swedes. Remember in Ravenswood, Ungentheo slaughtered Haethcyn, Hrethel's son, when the Geat people, in their arrogance, first attacked the fierce Shrilfings. The returning blow was quickly struck by Othir's father. Old and terrible, he felled the Sea King, and saved his own aged wife, the mother of Onela and of Othir, bereft of her gold rings. Then he kept hard on the heels of the foe, and drove them, leaderless, lucky to get away, in a desperate rout into Ravenswood. His army surrounded the weary remnant, where they nursed their wounds all through the night. He howled threats at those huddled survivors, promised to axe their bodies open when the dawn broke, dangle them from gallows to feed the birds. But at first light, when their spirits were lowest, relief arrived. They heard the sound of Higelac's horn, his trumpet calling as he came to find them, the hero in pursuit, at hand with troops. The bloody swath that Swedes and Geats cut through each other was everywhere. No one could miss their murderous feuding. Then the old man made his move, pulled back, barred his people in. Ungentheo withdrew to higher ground. Higelac's pride and prowess as a fighter were known to the Earl. He had no confidence that he could hold out against that horde of seamen, defend wife and the ones he loved from the shock of the attack. He retreated for shelter, behind the earth wall. Then Higelac swooped on the Swedes at bay. His banner swarmed into their refuge. His Geat forces drove forward to destroy the camp. There in his grey hairs Ungentheo was cornered, ringed around with swords, and it came to pass that the king's fate was in Eofor's hand, and in his alone. Wulf, son of Wonred, went for him in anger, split him open so that blood came spurting from under his hair. The old hero still did not flinch, but parried fast, hit back with a harder stroke. The king turned and took him on. Then Wonred's son, the brave Wulf, could land no blow against the aged lord. Ungentheo divided his helmet so that he buckled and bowed his bloodied head, and dropped to the ground. But his doom held off. Though he was cut deep, he recovered again. With his brother down, the undaunted Eofor, Higelac's thane, hefted his sword and smashed murderously at the massive helmet, past the lifted shield, and the king collapsed. The shepherd of people was sheared of life. Many then hurried to help Wulf, bandaged and lifted him, now that they were left, masters of the blood-soaked battlegrounds. One warrior stripped the other, looted Ungentheo's iron mail coat, his hard sword hilt, his helmet too, and carried the Graith to King Higelac. He accepted the prize, promised fairly that reward would come, and kept his word. For their bravery in action, when they arrived home, Eofor and Wulf were overloaded by Hrethel's son, Higelac the Geat, with gifts of land and linked rings that were worth a fortune. They had won glory, so there was no gainsaying his generosity, and he gave Eofor, his only daughter, to bide at home with him, an honor and a bond. So this bad blood between us and the Swedes, this vicious feud, I am convinced, is bound to revive. They will cross our borders and attack in force when they find out that Beowulf is dead. In days gone by, when our warriors fell and we were undefended, he kept our coffers and our kingdom safe. He worked for the people, but as well as that, he behaved like a hero. We must hurry now to take a last look at the king, and launch him, lord and lavisher of rings, on the funeral road. His royal pyre will melt no small amount of gold. Heaped there in a hoard, it was bought at heavy cost, and that pile of rings he paid for at the end with his own life will go up with the flame, be furled in fire. Treasure no follower will wear in his memory, nor lovely woman link and attach as a torque around her neck. But often, repeatedly, in the path of exile, they shall walk bereft, bowed under woe, now that their leader's laugh is silenced, high spirits quenched. Many a spear, dawn cold to the touch, will be taken down and waved on high. The swept harp will not waken warriors, but the raven winging darkly over the doom will have news, tidings for the eagle of how he hoped and ate, how the wolf and he made short work of the dead. Such was the drift of the dire report that gallant man delivered. He got little wrong in what he told and predicted. The whole troop rose in tears, then took their way to the uncanny scene under Erinnes. There, on the sand, where soul had left him, they found him at rest, their ring-giver. From days gone by, the great man had breathed his last. Beowulf the king had indeed met with a marvelous death. But what they saw first was far stranger. The serpent on the ground, gruesome and vile, lying facing him. The fire dragon was scarcely burnt, scorched all colors from head to tail. His entire length was 50 feet. He had shimmered forth on the night air once, then winged back down to his den. But death owned him now. He would never enter the earth gallery again. Beside him stood pitchers and piled-up dishes, silent flagons, precious swords, eaten through with rust, ranged as they had been when they waited their 1,000 winters underground. That huge cache, gold inherited from an ancient race, was under a spell, which meant no one was ever permitted to enter the ring hall unless God himself, mankind's keeper, true king of triumphs, allowed some person pleasing to him, and in his eyes worthy, to open the hoard. What came about brought to nothing the hopes of the one who had wrongly hidden riches under the rock face. First the dragon slew that man among men, who in turn made fierce amends, and settled the feud. Famous for his deeds, a warrior may be, but it remains a mystery where his life will end, when he may no longer dwell in the mead hall among his own. So it was with Beowulf when he faced the cruelty and cunning of the mound god. He himself was ignorant of how his departure from the world would happen. The high-born chiefs who had buried the treasure declared it until doomsday so accursed that whoever robbed it would be guilty of wrong and grimly punished for their transgression, hasped in hell bonds and heathen shrines. Yet Beowulf's gaze at the gold treasure, when he first saw it, had not been selfish. Wiglaf, son of Weohstan, spoke. Often, when one man follows his own will, many are hurt. This happened to us. Nothing we advised could ever convince the prince we loved, our land's guardian, not to vex the custodian of the gold. Let him lie where he was long accustomed, lurk here under earth until the end of the world. He held to his high destiny. The hoard is laid bare, but at a grave cost. It was too cruel a fate that forced the king to that encounter. I have been inside and seen everything amassed in the vault. I managed to enter, although no great welcome awaited me under the earth wall. I quickly gathered up a huge pile of the priceless treasure, hand-picked from the hoard, and carried them here, where the king could see them. He was still himself, alive, aware, and in spite of his weakness, he had many requests. He wanted me to greet you and order the building of a barrow that would crown the site of his pyre, serve as his memorial, and a commanding position, since of all men to have lived and thrived and lorded it on the earth, his worth and due as a warrior were the greatest. Now let us again go quickly and feast our eyes on that amazing fortune heaped under the wall. I will show the way and take you close to those coffers packed with rings and bars of gold. Let a bier be made and got ready quickly when we come out, and then let us bring the body of our lord, the man we loved, to where he will lodge for a long time in the care of the Almighty. Then Weohstan's son, stalwart to the end, had orders given to owners of dwellings, many people of importance in the land, to fetch wood from far and wide for the good man's pyre. Now shall flame consume our leader in the battle. The blaze darkened round him who stood his ground in the steel hail. When the arrow storm shot the bowstring, pelted the shield wall, the shaft hit home. Feather-fledged, it finned the barb in light. Next the wise son of Weohstan called from among the king's thanes a group of 7. He selected the best and entered with them, the 8th of their number. Under the god-cursed roof, one raised a light torch and led the way. No lots were cast for who should loot the hoard, for it was obvious to them that every bit of it lay unprotected within the vault. There for the taking, it was no trouble to hurry to work and haul out the priceless store. They pitched the dragon over the cliff-top, let tide flow and backwash take the treasure minder. Then coiled gold was loaded on a cart in great abundance, and the grey-haired leader, the prince on his bier, borne to Hronesness. The Geat people built a pyre for Beowulf, stacked and decked it until it stood 4 square, hung with helmets, heavy war shields, and shining armor, just as he had ordered. Then his warriors laid him in the middle of it, mourning a lord far famed and beloved. On a height they kindled the hugest of all funeral fires. Fumes of wood smoke billowed darkly up. The blaze roared and drowned out their weeping. Wind died down and flames wrought havoc in the hot bone house, burning it to the core. They were disconsolate and wailed aloud for their lord's decease. A Geat woman, too, sang out in grief. With hair bound up, she unburdened herself of her worst fears, a wild litany of nightmare and lament. Her nation invaded, enemies on the rampage, bodies in piles, slavery and abasement. Heaven swallowed the smoke. Then the Geat people began to construct a mound on a headland, high and imposing, a marker that sailors could see from far away, and in 10 days they had done the work. It was their hero's memorial. What remained from the fire they housed inside of it, behind a wall, as worthy of him as their workmanship could make it, and they buried torques in the barrow, and jewels, and a trove of such things as trespassing men had once dared to drag from the hoard. Then they let the ground keep that ancestral treasure, gold under gravel, gone to earth, as useless to men now as it ever was. Then 12 warriors rode round the tomb, chieftains, sons, champions in battle, all of them distraught, chanting in dirges, mourning his loss as a man and a king. They extolled his heroic nature and exploits, and gave thanks for his greatness, which was the proper thing. For a man should praise a prince whom he holds dear, and cherish his memory, when that moment comes, when he has to be conveyed from his bodily home. So the Geat people, his hearth companions, sorrowed for the lord who had been laid low. They said that of all of the kings among the earth, he was the man most gracious and fair-minded, kindest to his people, and keenest to win fame. And that concludes the telling of the tale of Beowulf.